Welcome back, everybody. Let's talk about Bitcoin once again, your favorite orange coin. I want to talk about the Bitcoin security model and particularly with regards to the recently, at least at the time I'm filming this, the recently risen transaction fees. So this video is going to be based on my security model article. If you have read this already, then the video will not give you a whole lot of new information, but there's a couple of updates and I'm just going to explain everything a little bit. So yeah, watch it. And what we will cover today is quite, so the article is very in depth, it's quite long. I'll try to keep the video short. At some points I'll cut it short a bit so the video doesn't go like 20 minutes plus, but we'll see what we can do. So why the security model is broken and why that matters, how Bitcoin security works, its problems, how the network can be attacked, what the risk factors for such an attack are, how you can defend it, and then the last part is actually the part like with the most recent developments about Bitcoin transaction fees. So if you're only interested in that, if you know about the security model, if you've read the article, then feel free to skip ahead because the rest is going to be more evergreen content. Okie dokie. So what's wrong with the Bitcoin security model? So very basically, the security model refers to how the Bitcoin network is secured by the subsidies that are paid to the miners and the transaction fees that also the miners get. What you have to know about the Bitcoin network is that there is a virtuous circle, which can also turn into a vicious circle. So initially, if we start here with this diagram in the middle, let's say there's some kind of demand for Bitcoin. And then for whatever reason, the Bitcoin price rises, which means mining becomes more profitable. So more people start mining. The more people mine, the more secure the Bitcoin network is. And this should, again, drive up demand for Bitcoin. This is the proof of work circle, or the virtuous proof of work circle. And there's also a virtuous circle in terms of the stakeholders of the network. So again, more demand means there's more people developing or working on development of the network, which means more people are incentivized to mine, which means there are more people who want to become a node, and then this also secures the network, so demand should go up. Now, obviously, this could also go the other direction. So price goes down means mining becomes less profitable, miner capitulation, less security, yada yada. So all of these things can happen. This is just, again, a very basic overview of proof of work and the stakeholders in the network. Now, what's actually the problem here? So when we refer to the security model and that is broken, here we can actually look at an updated graph. So again, very basically, Bitcoin miners have a very simple equation. Their income is the mining subsidy, which is the block reward, and the transaction fees. And this graph here shows how much Bitcoin miners earn per month. So as you can see, this goes all the way back until 2017. There was a big spike when there was the 2017 bull market. And then again, another spike in the last bull market. And then recently it spiked up a little bit again. Here, the interesting part is actually the one in blue, because the red one are the subsidies. But the one in blue are the transaction fees. And as you can see, there's a lot more red than blue. And the problem is that at some point, the blue part of this graph needs to outperform the red part, because the red part is by definition going down, because miners are getting less and less subsidies, which is called the Bitcoin halving. So every 4 years, the rewards or the subsidies that Bitcoin miners get, they get halved. Now, nothing has happened so far to the Bitcoin network. It's been working flawlessly for what, like almost 15 years or how much it is. So people think that, well, there's no problem. The security budget, it'll fix itself. That's all fine and good. However, if you're familiar with the Turkey problem, then you know that things can go very well until they don't. So the Turkey the turkey fallacy, not the turkey problem, means it refers to like an anecdote where a turkey is happily getting fed until one day it gets led to the slaughterhouse, not knowing what is waiting for the turkey. And the same thing could happen with the Bitcoin network. And the slaughterhouse for the Bitcoin network would be an attack on the network. So to understand how this attack works, we need to very briefly understand how Bitcoin security works. Again, you might know this. I hope you know this, because this video is not really for beginners. If you don't, very brief overview. So the process of mining Bitcoin refers to people buying specialized hardware which runs very complicated computations, and the person or the entity who solves these complicated computations first, they get the mining reward and the transaction fees. This is very basically how it works. So this complicated hardware, this specialized hardware is called ASICs, and these complicated computations, they are what make up this proof of work consensus mechanism which secures the Bitcoin blockchain. Now, what is important here beyond like how the security works is how miners calculate their profit and loss. So miner income comes from the block reward and transaction fees, as we said. Miner expenditure, so what they have to spend, is electricity costs and the cost of hardware. And this is a market which is very saturated and very specialized. So you as an individual, you wouldn't be able to mine Bitcoin profitably. And here in this article, we had this graph included, which has like a nice little calculator that shows you that it's not possible to mine Bitcoin profitably. So a Bitcoin mining operation, those are huge, how do you call this? Not wholesale, but like huge mining farms with like hundreds of thousands of these ASICs. So these are actual businesses. This is not something you do in your backyard or something. Now, in terms of the security, what if there was a possibility to cheat in the Bitcoin network? So what if you didn't have to mine Bitcoins, but you could somehow earn more? This kind of cheating is possible, but no rational actor would do that. Why not? First of all, Bitcoin miners, they have to spend a lot of money upfront to buy the specialized hardware. So there's actually an article that I quoted here from, I think he's like a researcher or something, famous one. He estimates that miners have to put up in 1 entire year of block rewards to mine Bitcoin for 2 years. So when you commit to a mining business, first you are in the red, and then you actually make good on this. So this is the first part. And that's why miners have an incentive to stay honest and to keep their cash cow, which is the Bitcoin network. That's why no sane economic actor would actually attack the Bitcoin network. But would this actually be possible, and how would it work? Yes, it would. And this is called a double spend attack. So again, very basically, a double spend attack means you, as the miner, you process a transaction, and then you are, let's say, able to take the transaction back. This is like a little bit of a technical process, but let's try to keep it simple. You take the transaction back, and then you get the money that you have taken for the transaction, and you get the Bitcoin back. So essentially, you spend the same Bitcoin twice. This kind of attack is possible, and this is what's referred to in like the security model problem. And there are two possible motives for why someone would attack the Bitcoin network. So first of all, it could be a rational motive. So you could be economically motivated, that you simply want to make money off this attack. Or the other possible incentive would be an irrational attack, so just to sabotage the Bitcoin network. Now, there are a couple of factors which are important in terms of how you calculate whether it's worth attacking the network. So I listed those here. You would have to calculate how realistic is it to actually get away with it. Like, is the network going to defend itself somehow? How many coins would you gain in the attack? How expensive would it be to actually acquire the amount of, it's called hash power, so the kind of amount of mining equipment that you need to attack the network. And then obviously, how much will the price tank after you attack the network? Because imagine you are an actor who wants to attack the Bitcoin network and you actually pull it off, and then the network and the market, everyone notices it. Obviously, the value of your Bitcoin would tank. Now, how much it tanks, this would influence how much, well, whether it's worth it to attack the Bitcoin network. As I said, this is not economically, or like there is no economic incentive to do this at the moment. This would be very costly. However, it's theoretically possible. And one guy, I think he's a dev, Joe Kelly, he laid out in a couple of blog posts how to do this. So the blueprint for attacking Bitcoin. And I strongly recommend reading this if you're into this kind of stuff, if you're interested in like the problems of the Bitcoin network or how it works essentially. Let me just check. I should have it open here. Yes, it's here. It's a very long. This is actually only one of his blog posts. Is like a 3-parter, and then he has another 3-parter. It's a 26-minute read, but I read through all of it and I summed it up here. So we'll keep it to my short version. So basically, only state actors at the moment have the means and the motivations to attack the network. And if a state wanted to do it, because a state has the resources, they could easily pull it off. How exactly would this work? I'll keep this as brief as possible. So he argues, again, I'm only citing Joe Kelly here because he laid out the blueprint and to me it makes total sense. He said, first of all, a state would block entry points to the network by banning exchanges. Kind of seeing something like this, right? At the moment, exchanges are not really banned, but there's problems with regulations in the US. Then the state would be incentivized to announce that they attack the network. Why? Because imagine you are state X, let's not take a real one, but a hypothetical one. You announce you are getting into mining and you will acquire a majority of the hash rate. And Joe Kiley argues that only this announcement would have a detrimental effect on the Bitcoin price, because people would be afraid, or the market would be afraid, that this state will eventually, this is not a slow, sorry, not a quick process, but eventually this state would take over the network, would acquire the majority of the hash power, and would eventually then de facto cancel Bitcoin. And he also lays out a couple of risk factors for the Bitcoin network and what would make an attack easier. So I think here it's actually worth going through all of them because it makes the understanding a little bit easier. So first of all, he argues that the number of targets makes a difference. So by this he means how many possible targets are there for a double spend attack. The target would be anywhere where you can spend Bitcoin. Now imagine something here, it's purposeful to imagine something like Thorchain, for example, which is where you can spend your Bitcoin essentially against a smart contract. So which processes your transaction in a deterministic way. These are the kinds of attack levers that like a rogue actor would look for, because there you spend your Bitcoin, you immediately get the whatever stablecoin or whatever it is, you immediately get it back, and then later you get your double spend Bitcoin back. Whereas, for example, if you spend this stupid example, but if you spend it at a coffee shop, this wouldn't be quite the same thing. So you want to look for this kind of more of these deterministic number of targets. Then the block size does matter. So the block size is, I think at the moment is what, like 2 or 4 MB, a Bitcoin block. And the bigger the block size, the more potential transactions are in a Bitcoin block. And imagine there's a big block size, so you can potentially target a lot of different transactions in the same block. And the more blocks you have to mine, the higher your costs, which translates into you want bigger blocks so you can attack the network more cheaply. Then he says confirmation policies would also make a big difference. So this is again a whole point in and of itself. I don't want to dive into this because it'll get very long, but 6 confirmations do not make a transaction secure, because double spend attack works in this way that you don't have one chain which gets mined and then you attack the network and you have to kind of reverse something. That's not how it works. You would mine a second chain in parallel, and then at some point you reveal your second chain, and because of the way the Bitcoin network is designed, the second chain would then automatically be recognized as the true chain, and you would get your Bitcoin back. Again, it's a bit more difficult than that, but this is basically the crux here. And that's why he says, okay, this doesn't actually matter how many confirmations a transaction has. It's only about whether you can actually acquire a majority of the hash rate. Then, of course, privacy policy. So the more KYC entrances there are to the Bitcoin network, the easier then it is to, well, see where these double spend coins went, and whether you can actually reverse the stolen goods. So again, if you get coffee for your stolen Bitcoin, then you will probably not be able to reverse that. Let's go here a little bit ahead, because you can spend a lot of time on this. How can you defend Bitcoin security? So here I wrote that Bitcoin suffers from its own security trilemma. The problem here is that the equation that miners face is their income, which we said are subsidies plus transaction fees, against their expenditures, which are cost of electricity, which is actually negligible, and the cost of the mining equipment. And the income side is automatically dropping every 4 years because the subsidies are dropping and they're getting halved. So at some point, there's not going to be any more subsidies, and actually pretty soon, in a decade or two, they will be really negligible. And this is essentially the heart of the problem here, that these subsidies have to be replaced by transaction fees, so mining is still worth it. Now, how can you do that? You could either introduce more Bitcoin, so essentially you just keep on paying the mining rewards in a different way. This would be inflation. This is an absolute no-go in the Bitcoin community. This will never happen. I know this won't happen because there would never be a consensus to do that. You can, so the coins can become less liquid. So essentially, you just settle transactions off the network. So imagine you have a Bitcoin and your buddy has a Bitcoin, and you transact between each other, but actually write everything down on a piece of paper instead of really doing it on the Bitcoin network. So this is called an OTC, an over-the-counter transaction. And only after a while, then you tally everything up and then you settle the actual transaction. So all these transactions in the middle, they're not registered on the Bitcoin blockchain. This is, well, a very obvious solution, but this makes things more centralized, which is, again, like a big no-go in the Bitcoin community, because we don't want anything that's centralized. The last thing would be changing, skipping ahead here. The last thing would be, well, kind of what I'm referring to already, less decentralization. So this, you can have decentralization in terms of how the transactions are settled, but you can also have decentralization in terms of where Bitcoins are produced. So less miners mining Bitcoin, which is already de facto the case, because there's only a couple of mining cartels, and I think like 3 or 4 or 5 make up 70% of the hash rate. And you can also have more custodial trading. So what I described were the off-chain settlements, but you can have custodial trading where actually an exchange, for example, settles your transaction. All of these are not really socially acceptable. There is a study that I cited from this Hasu guy who found out that there is a big resistance to change in the Bitcoin network because, well, Bitcoiners are just very conservative, not socially conservative, but in terms of their protocol. So that's why this has not really been figured out. And there would be other possible solutions in terms of an attack. So, for example, a social consensus where just big honest miners agree on, okay, our blockchain is the one true blockchain, but then what's really the point of proof of work if you're not securing the network by these computations and the money spent on electricity and on mining Bitcoin, but it is a social consensus, then why do we have this step in the middle? It doesn't make sense. Yeah. So there's a couple of things to unpack here. The best case scenario in terms of defense of the Bitcoin network would be, as I wrote, massive bottom-up adoption of the network. So unfortunately, I don't have the headline here now, but I think it was in Switzerland or Liechtenstein, one of these countries, where recently there were news that you can pay taxes in Bitcoin now. This is actually an example of top-down adoption. So I'm quoting the wrong thing, but bottom-up adoption would be just whatever, coffee shops accepting Bitcoin. So anywhere where people or just economic like participants in the economy where they're happy to accept Bitcoin in parallel with fiat currency, this would be bottom-up adoption. So the more of these you have, the higher the cost of attacking the network. How well this is going, well, this is again topic for another video. Now, this is the part where we dive into the more recent stuff about Bitcoin transaction fees. So this is probably what you were looking for. Now, Bitcoin transaction fees, they were for a very long time very, very low. And we can actually then here skip ahead to, I think this part here is quite instructive, where it shows that cumulative transaction fees in US dollars, they topped out around the top of the last bull market. So a couple of years ago, so this discussion has been going on for a long time. And a couple of years ago, it was argued that, oh, it's no problem. In the next bull market, things will fix itself or fix themselves. And people are just going to transact a lot more in Bitcoin. It'll be fine. However, as we saw in the last bull market, that transaction fees are not going up, which means people are not using the Bitcoin network for transactions. And they topped here around May 2021. We can also see this here. This is a graph in percent. So how much of miner revenue do transaction fees make up? So in terms of percent here, you see before the 2017 bull market, it was negligible, less than 1%. Then it actually went up. But then it kind of plateaued around 2020. It was 5%. And this is here in 2021, in the last bull market. It should have gone up a lot more. It didn't. Instead, it went down again. So this translates into no one actually uses the Bitcoin blockchain for transactions. So block space demand is kind of stable, as you can see here. So in 2022, it only really goes up when shit hits the fan. So Russia invades Ukraine, a lot more transactions on the Bitcoin blockchain. Luna collapses, same thing. And a couple other ones. The big one was the FTX collapse. But it's not like the Bitcoin blockchain is actually used to settle a lot of transactions. And this is, so the idea that things will go up, this is described here. It was predicted that in 2019, they predicted that transaction fees will go up. Instead, they went down. So the exact opposite happened. Where is this problem coming from? I argue that it's from Bitcoin's value proposition. So again, a topic for an entire video and even more. Bitcoin and Bitcoiners position the Bitcoin, the asset, as store of value, so as digital gold, which makes sense. It has a lot of, how do I put this? A lot of attributes that are very similar to gold. However, if you think about gold, you don't use gold to settle transactions. And this is in direct contradiction to Bitcoin, the network, which can be used for peer-to-peer transactions. So these two don't really go together. And until the Bitcoin community finds a way to kind of marry these two in a way, it's not going to work. And I don't think this security model will be fixable. And this is why I argue that there is not really no way around this fact that Bitcoin needs to become a medium of exchange to have a sustainable security model. Now, what has happened recently is that actually Bitcoin transaction fees have gone up. So here we get into the recent part, and there was on Glassnode an article about, or sorry, rather, an analysis about how, well, the transaction count has gone up and also transaction fees. Why is this the case? Because of BRC20 tokens. If you don't know what BRC20 tokens are, watch my other video. I explained it. Basically, it's shitcoins on the Bitcoin blockchain, and they led to this effect that people are using the Bitcoin blockchain a lot more in order to gamble with these shitcoins. And here there are a couple of graphs. There's a lot of information here in this article, but what I do want to point out is, hold on, let me find the correct one here. This one here. So miner revenue breakdown. So here you have how much money miners make. Orange, again, is the subsidy. Red are the transaction fees. And you can see here in this little corner down there, transaction fees ticked up quite a bit. This is because of the shitcoin gambling on Bitcoin. Now, there was a lot of drama around this. I discussed this in the other video. Is this sustainable? Well, probably not. And again, you come back to the fact that you have to use the Bitcoin blockchain in one way or another as a medium of exchange. Now, I argue this will inevitably lead to a degree of centralization. So the only really feasible way I see to marry the store of value and medium of exchange value proposition is by allowing layer 2s, layer 3s to exist, and then people use those to transact their coins. And the layer 1 transactions is basically where you keep your Bitcoin kind of like gold. What I want to expand just a tiny little bit with an anecdote. What I don't understand is why there is not a bigger effort or drive to really drive this medium of exchange value proposition forward in the Bitcoin community. Now, I realize it's a decentralized community and there are different stakeholders and opinions and everything. However, just as a personal anecdote, I'm currently in an Asian country, and there is a bank that you can get an account with. And in this Asian country, this bank is very, very widely used. Pretty much everyone has this bank, and it makes payments, wireless payments, incredibly convenient. So what you do is you go to this bank, you get the account, then you have an app, and you can absolutely everywhere pay with this app by just scanning a QR code. And I was thinking, why isn't this possible? It is possible. Why isn't it more widespread with the Lightning Network? I know this exists in like El Salvador and probably a couple other places as well, but it's not really that well known. And then actually, when you look at the Lightning Network, which is a layer 2 solution for Bitcoin, you can see that it's, again, here's a lot to unpack, but the Lightning capacity, so basically how much you can, got an error here, how much you can trade on the Lightning Network, it's really not that much. It's only 5,000 Bitcoin. And if you then see the amount of payments is rising in the, last year, so this is July 2022, and it is like 3x, almost 4x, which is nice. But if you then compare it to how much volume there is on, for example, Ethereum, how much wrapped Bitcoin, it's just incomparable. And it's just very, very obvious that this kind of utility-based use case for Bitcoin is there, but it is very small, and it's just lacking like a centralized leader or an entity, someone who propels it forward. And I think this will be absolutely key to success, because as we saw with these recent shitcoins and like these BRC20 shitcoins, you don't even need an actor, like a motivated actor with a motive to brick the Bitcoin blockchain. You can have something like this, which was most probably a fad and which wasn't even planned for, and still transactions were stuck in the Bitcoin blockchain. And I, for example, myself had a couple of transactions stuck for a few days. They weren't time sensitive, so it wasn't a problem. But imagine they are, is a huge problem. And this is just, where's the utility of the network in that case? If things are not working, no one's going to use this. And then, yeah, it's pointless. Another solution that I talk about here, I don't really want to dive into this now, but this is merged mining. So essentially, this is just a way of implementing another L2, which miners could mine and then get paid for. So this is really just outsourcing this inflation to an L2, and miners get paid a subsidy for their work, or like a bribe for their work on an L2 instead of on the L1 Bitcoin chain. I haven't really seen any discussion around this. I'm not sure how popular this would be. There's a very well-known and well-respected Bitcoin researcher who argues for this, but again, this I haven't really seen this, so I don't think this is really relevant. Now, to sum it up, this is quite a bit, and yeah, this video has unfortunately turned out again to be 30 minutes, so yeah, sorry about that, but that's just how it goes. If you want really nuanced knowledge, then, well, the videos are going to be longer. That's why I try to put chapters on them, and then you can skip to what you're really interested in. So to conclude, the security of Bitcoin depends on the security budget. And at the moment, there's no economic incentive to attack it. And there's also not really an incentive to sabotage it in a coordinated way, because Bitcoin is just really not that popular and not that important to do. However, this would change if Bitcoin were to become more popular, if it were to become more entrenched, if it were to onboard a lot more people, and if it were to develop into a more privacy-focused blockchain. And then states may have actually the incentive to well, attack the Bitcoin blockchain, or at least try to censor it in a way. And the only way I can see this being solved, the security model being solved, is by more demand for actual Bitcoin transactions. Now, these can be, or maybe actually probably have to be settled on an L2, because the settlement on the L1 will just not work for many transactions. But it is just inevitable. And as I write here, in the end, given how conservative Bitcoiners are, big protocol changes look out of the question. But like this medium exchange via something like Lightning, it does not really have to contradict the digital gold value proposition that Bitcoiners love so much. So I don't really see why this is such a big problem, but it is what it is. Bitcoiners are just a very special bunch. Yeah. Now, if you like this, then subscribe to my channel, subscribe to my Twitter account, which is somewhere over here, and also subscribe to my website, cryptoslav.io, where I send out newsletters, and I'll see you guys in the next one.